August 31st, 1888, 3:40 in the morning. The city of London is a tale of two worlds, sleeping under a blanket of coal smoke and fog. In the opulent West End, gaslights cast a golden glow on grand townhouses. But here, in the East End, in the labyrinthine slum of Whitechapel, the darkness is different. It's a thick, suffocating thing, clinging to the grimy brick of the unpaved alleys. A cart driver named Charles Cross is walking down Bucks Row, a dim, narrow street. He sees a dark shape lying on the ground near a stable entrance, a discarded tarpaulin, perhaps. As he gets closer, the flickering gaslight reveals the shape is a woman. He thinks she's drunk, or maybe worse. He calls over another man walking by, Robert Paul. Together, they approach. They see her skirts are raised. They try to straighten them to give her some dignity. They feel that she is still warm. Thinking she might have been assaulted, they agree to find a policeman. What they don't see in the treacherous gloom is that the woman's throat has been cut so deeply her head is almost severed from her body. What they can't know is that her abdomen has been savagely mutilated. The woman's name is Marianne Nichols, and her discovery marks the grim commencement of a reign of terror that will not only paralyze a city, but will give birth to a new kind of monster, a phantom who will become famous in his own absence, a killer whose name, whispered in a letter to the press, will become a global legend. This is not just the story of a series of horrific murders. This is the story of how Victorian society, in a crucible of poverty, fear, and unprecedented media frenzy, meticulously crafted the archetype for every celebrity serial killer to come. This is the anatomy of Jack the Ripper. Chapter 1: The Crucible of Poverty and Fear. To understand Jack the Ripper, you must first understand his hunting ground. The London of 1888 was the heart of the British Empire, a city of imperial grandeur and staggering wealth. But its East End, particularly the district of Whitechapel, was a festering wound. Of the city's 5 million inhabitants, over 2 million lived below the poverty line, and Whitechapel was the epicenter of this destitution. It was a densely packed, suffocating warren of streets housing nearly 80,000 souls, many of them recent immigrants, Irish families fleeing the potato famine, Jewish refugees escaping pogroms in Eastern Europe. They arrived with nothing and were crammed into a district with no room to spare. The living conditions were a vision of hell. The Morning Chronicle described it as a place of unmade roads, often mere alleys, houses small and without foundations. There was almost no drainage or sewerage. The air was thick with the stench of pigs and cows in backyards, noxious trades such as boiling tripe, melting tallow for candles, and lakes of putrefying night soil. This was a world of hand-to-mouth survival. Men sought daily wages at the docks. Children earned a few pence as chimney sweeps or by filling matchboxes at home. The grim reality of this exploitation was laid bare by the Bryant and May match factory strike of 1888, where thousands of young women worked in appalling conditions, fined for lateness or even for taking excessive toilet breaks. It was this pervasive poverty that made the Ripper's victims so profoundly vulnerable. Facing destitution, many women were compelled to engage in prostitution, often for, as the report notes, less than the price of a bed for the night. They became easy targets in the unlit, anonymous alleys. The environment of overcrowding and transience created a profound sense of anonymity. In this sea of faces, no one stood out. There was no community cohesion to deter a predator. This landscape allowed the killer to select his victims, commit his brutal crimes in secluded yet accessible spots, and then melt away into the vast, intricate network of streets without being identified or tracked. The primitive state of policing at the time only compounded the problem. The East End wasn't merely a passive backdrop for the murders, it was an active enabler of the Ripper's elusiveness. And to the wealthy citizens of the West End, this place was more than just a slum. It was a threat, a crime-ridden and poverty-stricken world that symbolized the moral and physical decay of the underclass. The fear was not just of an individual killer, but of what he represented, the potential for the depraved East to cross the boundary into their respectable world, sparking the feared English Revolution. The Ripper became a terrifying manifestation of their deepest class anxieties.
Welcome to Unsolved. Subscribe and join me on the quest to dissecting the greatest unsolved crimes in history.
Chapter 2. The Timeline of Terror. After the murder of Marianne Nichols on August 31st, the terror in Whitechapel escalated with chilling speed and consistency. The killer's modus operandi was shockingly brutal. He would lure his victims into secluded courtyards or dark streets, slice their throats with a long, sharp knife, and then, as they bled to death, he would begin his horrific mutilations. Just 8 days after the first murder, on September 8th, the body of Annie Chapman was found. Like Nichols, her throat was cut, but this time the killer's savagery had deepened. She had been brutally disemboweled. The city reeled, but the worst was yet to come. The night of September 30th became known as the double event. At 1 a.m., the body of Elizabeth Stride was discovered. Her throat was cut, but her body was otherwise untouched. Police believe the killer may have been interrupted. If so, he was not deterred for long. Less than an hour later, the body of Catherine Eddowes was found in nearby Mitre Square. The Ripper had not only disemboweled her, but had also mutilated her face and removed her left kidney. The extreme and consistent nature of these mutilations went far beyond the act of killing. It suggested a deeper, more disturbing intent, ritualistic, pathological. The press and the public began to speculate that the killer possessed at least some knowledge of human anatomy. Was he a doctor? A butcher? This calculated expertise, whether real or perceived, transformed the killer from a common criminal into a monstrous, almost superhuman figure. Police were at a complete loss. The state of forensic science in 1888 was rudimentary. Fingerprinting and blood typing did not yet exist as investigative tools. They had no suspects, no leads, and were facing immense public pressure. This pressure led to constant changes in police personnel, with experienced officers frequently transferred, which, as the report notes, halted the progress of the investigation. The reign of terror reached its horrifying apex on November 9th. The killer moved indoors into the single rented room of his final canonical victim, Mary Jane Kelly. What police discovered there was a scene of almost unimaginable butchery. Her body was so hideously mutilated and disemboweled that she was barely recognizable as human. 5 women, 5 brutal murders in the span of just 10 weeks. The killer, it seemed, could strike anywhere, at any time, and vanish without a trace. The police were powerless. But another force was rising, one that would do more to shape the killer's identity than any detective work. The burgeoning mass media was about to turn a murderer into a legend. Chapter 3. Murder for a Penny. The Jack the Ripper murders occurred at a pivotal moment in the history of journalism.
The rise of cheap, mass-produced penny newspapers had created a voracious public appetite for news, and nothing sold papers like murder, especially murder with a sexual element. The Ripper case was the ultimate commodity. The press didn't just report on the murders, they actively whipped up a nationwide and international panic. They filled their pages with vivid descriptions and grisly details, meticulously detailing how the Ripper disemboweled and then left them to die. This sensationalism wasn't just for the literate upper classes. Newspapers like the Police News published voyeuristic and sexualized illustrations of the victims as they sprawled in the streets, a graphic and inflammatory tactic crucial for reaching the largely illiterate poor. This media frenzy created the killer's very identity. The name Jack the Ripper itself did not come from a police file or a witness. It originated in a letter, the infamous Dear Boss letter, sent to a London newspaper. The letter, signed Jack the Ripper, taunted the police and promised more to come. Today, most historians believe this letter and hundreds of letters like it were hoaxes, and that the Dear Boss letter was almost certainly written by journalists to keep the story alive and sell more papers. In the absence of a real suspect, the press created one. They developed the Ripper figure through rumor and conjecture, even offering portraits of a person seen only by his victims. These illustrations were often dangerously biased. Some depicted the Ripper with large noses, suggesting he was Jewish. Others showed him in doctor's clothing. This speculation wasn't harmless. It led to real-world attacks on innocent Jewish immigrants, doctors, and butchers in the East End. The press was crafting a monstrous figure that transcended human reality. This sensationalism had a profound and detrimental impact on the police investigation. The constant public criticism, fanned by the press, led to widespread complaints to Parliament. This, in turn, led to those constant changes of police officers, which crippled the investigation. The media circus relentlessly hounded the police, wasting, as the report states, valuable police time that could have been dedicated to actual detective work. The relationship was a toxic symbiosis. The press profited from the mystery and the police's inability to solve it, while simultaneously undermining their efforts with incessant criticism and demands for immediate results. They created a feedback loop where their sensationalism fueled public hysteria, which in turn hindered the police, which in turn created more sensational stories to report. It was a watershed moment, establishing a template for how media could monetize and immortalize a criminal, effectively making the Ripper the world's first celebrity serial killer. Chapter 4. Societal shockwaves. The terror of Jack the Ripper was not confined to London. The notoriety of the murders was becoming truly international. News traveled via telegraph, appearing in newspapers from Europe to the Americas. In the United States, reports of the Ripper's crimes created mass hysteria and inspired many copycat killings. The psychological penetration was so deep that casebooks from London's Bethlehem Asylum from the period show patients consumed by delusions centered around the Whitechapel murders. Male patients feared being suspected. Female patients lived in terror of mutilation. But amid the fear and hysteria, something remarkable happened. The murders forced a stark public confrontation with the horrific social conditions of the East End, a reality the affluent classes had long ignored. The unflinching journalistic exposure of Whitechapel's squalor, combined with the palpable fear that the Ripper could cross the boundary into their respectable world, created a moral and political will for change. The murders inadvertently became a powerful, albeit negative, catalyst for social reform. As journalists reported on the killings, they were directly confronted with the squalor and began calling for change. Newspapers, which had once ignored the plight of the poor, started focusing on the efforts of philanthropists in the area. The great playwright George Bernard Shaw even humorously suggested that the murders were committed precisely to attract attention to the area and bring about social change. This public pressure worked. The labyrinthine layout of the East End, now seen as a haven for immorality, led to calls for slum clearances. This culminated in the passage of the Housing of the Working Classes Act of 1890 and the Public Health Amendment Act of 1890, which empowered local authorities to finally improve housing and sanitation. The murders, in a grim paradox, shone a harsh spotlight on the systemic failures of Victorian society, demonstrating a tragic form of progress born from terror. Chapter 5. The Birth of a Gothic Legend. Decades have passed. The terror has subsided. The social reforms have been enacted. But the legend of Jack the Ripper endures. Why? The most profound element is the simplest. His identity remains unknown. This elusiveness, this lack of a definitive resolution, created what the report calls a narrative vacuum, an absence of fact that was eagerly filled by the public imagination. With no real man to anchor the story, the Ripper became a blank canvas onto which society could project its deepest fears. He was transformed from a criminal into a boogeyman, a Gothic monster. This process was heavily influenced by the popular Gothic literature of the era. He was compared to the ghastly figures from the stories of Edgar Allan Poe. He was called Another Hyde, a reference to Robert Louis Stevenson's tale of a respectable doctor with a monstrous alter ego. He was even associated with that abhorrent race of human vampires and Bram Stoker's Dracula. This myth-making was commercialized by the rise of penny dreadfuls, cheap weekly publications focused on sensationalized crime stories. The first penny dreadful to feature the Ripper was published in 1888, before the murders had even concluded. It attributed the killings to a supernatural curse, allowing Victorian audiences to pretend that the notion of a human being perpetrating the slayings was impossible. This is the key to his immortality. The unknown allowed for infinite reinterpretation. As the report says, each writer fills in the blanks according to their own needs. He can be a psychological thriller, a historical whodunit, or a supernatural horror story. His ambiguity ensures his story never truly ends. Today there is an entire genre of ripperture and a field of amateur specialists known as ripperologists. He has appeared in over 100 books and films, from Alfred Hitchcock's silent classic, The Lodger, to modern graphic novels. He became the original celebrity serial killer, the blueprint for how society would engage with and fictionalize the monsters that followed. His legacy is not just about the crimes he committed, but about how he irrevocably shaped the cultural perception of the serial killer, making him the prototype for the Gothic monster in real life. He remains a potent symbol of unresolved evil, a timeless tale of sensationalized murder, and a chilling reminder of the darker aspects of urban life and human nature. He is the ghost born of gaslight and newsprint, a shadow that forever haunts the streets of London and the world.